Hey y'all, welcome back to my channel, or just welcome if you're new. My name is Eboni Harris and I'm a relationship therapist based in Houston, Texas. So today is a get ready with me. I have some videos to record for a different project, another partnership with one of my businesses. And so I just want to jump on as I did my makeup and talk about communication again. I really want to talk about what we don't want to do, the do's and don'ts, but mainly the don'ts. We're going to talk about what not to do when it comes to communication. Sometimes we don't know if what we're saying is harmful or helpful. Sometimes we don't even think about it. And so I wanted to focus on what don't you say, what don't you do when you're trying to have healthy communication. I know sometimes we're not trying to be healthy, but that's what this is all about. Okay. All right. So I'm going to get started with makeup and jump into the don'ts. Okay. So one thing that I think is extremely important when it comes to communication is that you do not want to, you know what? I don't know why. I have to do my eyebrows first. All right, we're back. I realized I hadn't done my eyebrows and that needs to be done before we get started. Okay, so we're gonna get started with the first don't of the list of what not to do when you are in communication with someone. The first one is don't automatically say no or be negative. When it comes to communication, it is extremely important that when someone brings you a thought, an idea, or feeling, or even a request, or whatever the case may be, that you don't automatically say no. There are probably examples of situations in which, yes, you might end up saying like, hey, that's a danger, so we're gonna say no to that. But if this is someone, especially partnership, right? Because specifically we talk about relationships. So, but if this is someone you are in partnership with, and they come to you with an idea, even if your first thought is that makes no sense, why would we do that? You don't want to automatically say no, because that kind of means that you don't even trust or want to learn more about that thought process. And it discourages people from even having the conversations with you. And so we have to recognize, so if someone says like, hey, I'm thinking about after work, I'm going to go do this thing. And you're like, no, why would you do that? Come home, right? And you don't even know, you haven't asked questions, you haven't checked in, you haven't said anything. Then it just feels like, oh, you just don't want me to do anything I enjoy. And the same goes for if you're automatically negative. There are people in the world that their brain, most people, let me just say that, we are biologically wired to look for bad, to figure out the dangers and things like that. But if someone comes to you and says, you know, I've been thinking about wanting to start a business, and you immediately go to all the reasons why it's a bad idea to start a business, or all the things that can go wrong with the business, or have you thought about this, and have you thought about that, and have you thought about this? If you do that, that feels like, okay, you don't even want to know more about my thoughts, my plans, why I might want to do this, right? And so you have to be mindful when people are communicating their thoughts, their feelings, their opinions, all of that, that if you automatically come in with the, oh no, don't do that, that's not smart, then they are then not going to want to talk to you anymore. They're not going to want to share anything, or they're going to just feel like you don't know how to support them. You never support them in a way that feels genuine, because even if later on you say, okay, well, yeah, let's do that, that's smart, all they're going to remember is that automatic reaction. And so this is why it's extremely important for us when we communicate that we are taking some time to really try to process what they're saying before we respond. This is a conversation I've even had around sex, right? A lot of times there's one partner in a relationship that randomly they just try to have sex, right? Like nothing has warranted. We're in the middle of something else. It might be even a stressful situation, and they try to start having sex. Or they might say something about sex, and the other person's automatic response might be like, no, why would we do it? What are you talking about? We're doing this. Like, no, like what? And it might come across as offensive. You might think it's just like a joking thing, like, whatever, no, we're not doing it, you know. But because the automatic response is a no, it feels like a rejection. So there hasn't even been any thought around it, right? And I understand where that comes from, and that could be a whole different video around how our brains process the idea of sex, and specifically how it can differ a lot of times based on the gender lines, but sometimes it's just based on personality and who we are. If somebody was to come and bring that idea to you, if somebody was to come and say, hey, like, you know, let's go have sex, like whatever, and you say no, and then like 5 minutes later you're like, oh, well, I mean, I guess, yeah, that's fine. They already heard the no. And so we have to be mindful of those automatic responses, that automatic negativity, that automatic no, because that does shift the conversation, and it makes the person less likely to want to open up. It makes them less likely to want to share or talk about things, and not just in that conversation, but in conversations in the future. And so sometimes I'll have people say like, well, I don't understand why they don't talk, or I don't understand why they won't tell me things. And then when they start talking, they start getting questions. They start getting interrogated. When they tell them something, they start being like, no, that doesn't make any sense. Why would we do it that way? We're going to do it this way, right? So they're being belittled. It feels like there isn't any trust in like they can make good decisions, or even trying to understand their thought process. Because again, just because you don't agree with what the person says doesn't mean that they don't have a logical way of thinking, or the way that they got there doesn't make sense to them. And so take some time to really try to process and understand. Okay, the next thing is calling people outside of their names. Now, I know that we sometimes get really comfortable in communication, and we feel like, oh, well, you know me, and this just how we talk, or whatever the case may be. But you really want to be mindful of calling someone out their names. And we're not just talking about curse words, right? We're not just talking about, oh, well, I didn't call you the B word, or I didn't call you a hole, or I didn't call you, like, clearly I'm trying not to curse. Well, I don't use the B word anyway. But yeah, so you want to be mindful of, it doesn't even have to be that, right? It can be, if you're calling them anything outside of whatever they go by, whatever nickname you give them, whatever you normally call them, then that can feel offensive, right? You want to be mindful of that, because calling people out their name is a way to escalate the situation in a way that you probably didn't intend to, right? And so if you're like, oh, no, you're stupid, that doesn't make any sense, or you seem weak, or it feels like you're being weak, or you're being, people like to say, well, I didn't call you out your name because I said you're being I didn't say you are a B word. And it's like, yeah, sure, semantics, but it still has the same impact, and it still can feel the same way. So we have to be mindful of, the most important thing is, how is it received? Calling them things like stupid, or calling them like immature, or anything that's kind of labeling them can be an issue, right? Like, you don't want to label people as weak, immature, you're a liar, you're this. Like, when we overarch and give them these labels, then that creates this like barrier of like communication. Because like, if you feel like I'm a liar, or if you feel like I'm weak, or if you feel like I'm stupid, then why am I having a conversation with you? So we have to be mindful of the way we say things, and the labeling that we put on people, because that really can cause issues. And now I believe you think this about me, and that's going to be in the back of my head, not just in this communication, but in future communication, in the decisions I make, because that's not something that goes away. And I know sometimes we like to say, well, I was upset, like I was mad, I don't feel that way, I was upset. Well, how do I know that? Because where did that come from if it never crossed your mind, right? And I will say, upon more exploration, oftentimes that's how you feel. Now, do you feel that way all the time? Maybe not. Did you feel that way in that moment? Probably, right? Or are there remnants of like, this is some level of a belief that you might have about this person? Possibly. That does not mean it's true. That does not mean that's who that person is. But if you're willing to say it just because you're angry, then there's probably some truth in that's what you believe about that person. And so to shift beliefs, first you got to work with your language. You got to work with what you say and what you think. And so we have to work on not calling people certain names, not calling them outside of their names, and not labeling them in a negative way. Okay, so the next thing is probably more a personal bias. I don't know, a lot of people may not care about this, but this is something, again, from my experience, that I've noticed will escalate a disagreement in a way that you may not intend it, because it just can feel more aggressive than you mean it to be. And that's just using curse words in general, right? We want to be mindful of the type of words that we use when we're communicating. And so even if it's just like, I don't give a man, F that, da, 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 da. Even if you're just talking like that, sometimes that can be seen in a way that is more negative, and it can be seen as more aggressive, right? And so I personally, this is me personally, don't see a lot of value in having those, using curse words during disagreements. I haven't seen how it helps a conversation. I understand that sometimes we just want people to know just how frustrated or upset we are, but it doesn't seem to like really get you to a better space. It's not like it's helpful in them understanding your point of view or anything like that. It really just typically adds more aggression to the conversation that is needed, and that's not the intention a lot of times for the curse word, right? And so if you want to shut somebody down, if you want to like push them away or something like that, then sure, keep cursing. But the reality is that it's not typically helpful. And then the last one, not the last one, the second to the last one is blaming. When we're having communication, when we're talking about something, it's extremely important that we're not blaming the person or anyone about it, you know, especially the person we're talking to, right? But when we talk about blaming, that means we are talking about a specific topic. We're trying to come to some sort of resolution, and all you can focus on is how it's the other person's fault. And I get it because it feels like, well, if you got us here, why do we need to talk about this? Why do I need to help us get out of it? But the reality is blaming, again, is another way to shut someone down. Blaming is another way to make somebody feel like, okay, well then what's the point of us even having this conversation? If you've decided it's all my fault, and you've decided that there's nothing that you need to do about it, then what is the point of us talking about this? Because what it boils down to is we are both in relationship with each other. We're both trying to have a conversation and try to figure out some way to like resolve this or come to a good space or just talk about this specific topic. And so if the only thing you have to add to it is that it's your fault, then we're not going to get anywhere. So when it comes to communication, do not blame. Everything cannot be always one person's fault, right? And so we have to learn to take accountability, but also just focusing on, okay, if it's that person's fault, if they did something wrong, and especially if they're able to acknowledge like, hey, I know I messed up, then why are we continuing to harp on that? How is that helpful for us to continue to blame the person? Why aren't we focusing on how are we moving forward if we're planning to be in a relationship with this person? So blaming is another one that you have to limit and or don't do at all because it's just not helpful when we're trying to like have healthy communication. All right, and then the last thing that you want to not do when you're communicating is avoid communication. We often don't want to talk about certain topics, so we deflect and we bring up other topics. Or we try not, when someone is bringing up something, we say, oh, well, I want to talk about it later. I don't want to talk about that right now, with no intention of ever bringing it up. You have to communicate. The biggest impact of my services for my clients is teaching them how to communicate in a healthy way, teaching them how to communicate and feel heard, understood, and teaching them how to do the same for their partner, right? And so that is an extremely important part of communication, is the willingness to have the conversation. So you have to be willing to have the conversation. You have to be willing to talk about difficult things so that you can get to the next space and so that you can get into a better place. And that also means when there's conflict. Now, I'm not a big believer in like having conversations where we're yelling and talking all loud and we're so heated that we can't really hear each other. I also don't believe in not going to bed angry. Sometimes you need to go to bed to calm down. But I do believe that you have to have the conversation and you have to address conflict as it happens. And I say as it happens, meaning within a short period of time. We don't want to wait 3 weeks to talk about something. And so when it comes to communication, it's extremely important that if you are a person that needs time to calm down or you need to go to sleep, that you let the person know, hey, I still want to talk about this. I'm still present, but I just need to like get myself to a better space so I can actually be available to have a real conversation with you. If you push me to have the conversation right now, it's not going to happen because I'm going to be so flooded with my emotions that I won't be able to actually speak to what we're talking about. But I will come back to you. I will come back to you when I am ready to have the conversation. Okay? So that is extremely important, that you don't avoid conflict. You have to have the conversation. And if you just need some time to calm down and process, you let that person know and tell them that you'll come back and give them some sort of a time frame. Within the next 24 hours, we'll make sure we sit down and have a conversation. Within the next 24 hours, I will let you know that I'm calm and I can have the conversation. And the other person has to allow you that space, right? You have to allow people the space to calm themselves down so that y'all can have a productive conversation. And you have to trust that they're going to come back and do what they said they're going to do. You can't be a vindictive kind of person that's like, or petty, where it's like, well, I want to have the conversation and you didn't, so now I want to talk about it. Well, if I'm telling you, literally us having a conversation right now will be hurtful or harmful to us, why wouldn't you want to wait until we can really have a conversation where I can take accountability and I can say, okay, now I'm calm and I can have this conversation, whereas before I may not have been able to do that. So yeah, so whether it is an argument or just normal communication, you want to avoid these 5 different things. Don't do them, okay? And I really appreciate you watching the video. I hope this was helpful. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe, all the things. And if you're interested in learning more about healthy communication and relationship, sign up for my communication course. I'll have it in the description box down below. And I thank you for being here. That's all. Bye.